Tonight, we're going to dive into one of the most famous acts of protest in American history, the Boston Tea Party. But here's the thing, this was about so much more than just tea. It was a massive, dramatic message, and believe me, it was about to change everything. So I want you to picture this. It's a freezing cold December night in Boston Harbor, way back in 1773. The whole city is just tense. You've got 3 British ships just sitting there in the dark water, packed with tea. But this isn't just a beverage. It's become a symbol of Britain pushing its weight around, of a tax nobody in the colonies ever agreed to. So what was the final straw? It was a little thing called the Tea Act. And for the American colonists, this was not just another law about a drink. Nope, it was the perfect example of taxation without representation. I mean, it's all right there in the phrase, right? They were being forced to pay taxes by a government where they had zero voice. This was it. This was their line in the sand. In their response? Well, let's just say it was anything but subtle. This was a carefully planned, incredibly powerful act of defiance. The whole point was to send a message back to London that was so loud and so clear, there was just no way it could be ignored. They were done asking. Now they were demanding. Okay, so we know why they were so angry. Now let's get into the how. How did all that frustration get channeled into one of the most famous protests of all time? This is the moment it all ignited. Now, you have to get this. This wasn't some chaotic, out-of-control riot. Oh no, this was a planned operation. First, the colonists disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. And that wasn't just to hide their faces. It was a huge symbolic statement. They were basically shouting, "We are not British. We are something new. We are American." Then, under the cover of darkness, they got on those ships and just started heaving hundreds of chests of tea straight into the harbor. You can imagine the reaction across the ocean was immediate. And it wasn't just about the money lost on the tea. This was a massive slap in the face to British authority. The news sent absolute shockwaves through Britain, from the average person on the street all the way up to King George himself. Let's just say the colonists finally had their attention. So while Britain was reeling, what were people saying back in the colonies? Let's tune into some of the key voices, the actual people who were shaping this rebellion. We're going to hear from 3 really crucial figures. First, there's John Adams, the thoughtful, principled lawyer. Then you have his cousin, Samuel Adams, who was much more of a firebrand, a political agitator who was a key organizer of the protest. And finally, there's the wise, world-famous Benjamin Franklin, who was watching this whole crisis escalate, all the way from London. Let's start with John Adams. He actually wrote about this in his diary, and you can almost feel his amazement at how incredibly gutsy this was. He called the act so bold. You can tell he was impressed, but probably a little worried too. He knew this wasn't just some minor complaint. This was a major, major escalation. Now for Samuel Adams. The story goes that he said this right before the Tea Party kicked off. He was basically framing the whole thing not as an attack, but as a last resort. In his mind, they had tried everything else to protect their rights. Talking was over. This was the only move they had left. And then we have Benjamin Franklin. From his viewpoint in Britain, he instantly understood just how serious this was. He predicted that this single event would trigger a huge chain reaction, that it would have important consequences. Talk about an understatement, right? Franklin just knew things were never, ever going to be the same. And you know what? Franklin was absolutely right. And that leads us to the biggest consequence of that night, the fact that it was a true point of no return for the American colonies. Think about it. For years, all this frustration had been simmering just below the surface. Secret meetings, whispered conversations, quiet acts of protest. But after this night, that all changed. The simmering was about to become a full-on boil. Rebellion was no longer a secret. The protest in Boston Harbor completely shattered any idea that things could be patched up peacefully. The fight was now right out in the open for the entire world to see. There was no going back. The fuse for the revolution had officially been lit. So this all leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. The Boston Tea Party marks that exact moment of transformation, when quiet disagreement becomes loud, public, and irreversible rebellion. And it really makes you ask, what happens when people decide that talking has to stop and action has to begin?